Bill, when you think of New Zealand, do you think of hobbits or perhaps sheep? Our next guest says you should be thinking of investment instead. Bill Beekler is president of Barclays Partners Asset Management, and he joins us live from Wellington, New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bill. I guess the first question for you is, most people, when they think of New Zealand, either Lord of the Rings, for example, or a large dairy and agricultural industry. Why should we invest in New Zealand? What's so attractive?
Well, I think that if we go back to 1987, in a way, New Zealand got caught in some sort of a time warp, and the stocks here are, I think, extremely undervalued on a global basis, and there's some very attractive dividends that you can have from the stock market down here.
Hi, Bill. It's Michelle here in the United States. How do you do it? Are there ADRs that are listed in the United States that people can buy, or should they be investing via the currency? What would you recommend for a U.S.-based investor who would like to invest in New Zealand?
Michelle, right now it's very difficult for the average individual investor in the U.S. to get involved in New Zealand, which of course is one of the reasons my firm exists. But the only ADR that's available in the U.S. is New Zealand Telecom, which has had some struggles in the last few years. But I think that's going to change rather quickly. I think that the opportunities are so endless here that there will be opportunities created for the U.S. investor to invest in here. Just give it a little bit of time.
And Bill, it's Ross here in London. You talk about attractive yield. Give us an example here of why this market is cheap compared to what?
Well, the fact is that because of taxation issues and the fact that the share market here did not recover from its 87 highs for about 15 years, the only real way for companies down here to reward shareholders was with dividends. And we can find companies down here at the 7, 8, 9% annual dividend rate, which, as you know, is extremely attractive compared to the rest of the world.
At the same time, of course, the currency itself is attractive. We've got high interest rates in New Zealand, over 7%. But how important is what happens with the carry trade? Because we know it's driven. People will borrow yen and invest in New Zealand because they've got a high rate of return. But just how exposed is New Zealand to an unwinding of the carry?
Well, I think that the carry trade could go on for quite a long time, but the thing to remember is that the short-term 90-day T-bill rate here is about 7.5%. And so when you look at the differential between that and Japan or Euroland or the U.S., as long as that differential remains so large, it's very difficult for me to see the Kiwi currency going down. And in fact, I think it's going to hold around these levels for some time to come.
Bill, it's more, again, when people look for investing or attractive assets, as you mentioned, valuation is one of them, but growth is another one. And compared to the rest of Asia, or Asian companies, I should say, what kind of growth prospects do New Zealand companies pose for investors?
The New Zealand companies are trying very hard to expand their markets beyond that of New Zealand. I find it attractive because we can find companies that are headquartered here in New Zealand that are doing business in Japan and doing business in the Middle East, moving now to the UK and to the US. So if you'd like to be involved in some of the markets in Asia without some of the political risk that you might have, I think going to New Zealand is the way to do it.
Now, Bill, we've got a producer of our shows in New Zealand. You talk about this, a potential crude oil field on the southern tip of New Zealand. This might be news to some people. What's happening with that?
It's very interesting. In fact, some of this goes back in some ways to the Hunt brothers back in the 1970s, where they actually were here with Penrod Drilling looking for oil. But about a week ago, there was some oil bubbling up after an earthquake off the Stewart Island, off the southern part of New Zealand. And there is some conjecture that there could be a major oil field sitting off the bottom of New Zealand. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Very interesting indeed, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's Bill Beekler, president of Barclays Partners Asset Management.